Shot in the back and it's not your fault. You may drown in revenge. I'm disconnected from everyone. You never see you in CNN. You look a lot like. 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 I can hear you like you're calling out, like you're reaching, like it's me you want. I can feel you like it's yesterday. Was it centuries? And my mind's away without you. I keep it in without you. Without you, it's definite. have you call your way? You seem to have a plan. I walk around like meant to be, but not so sure. You look a lot like shot in the back and it's not your fault. You may drown in revenge. I'm disconnected from everyone. You never see you on CNN. You look a lot like. 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 I can hear you like you're calling out, like I'm reaching, like it's me you want. I can feel you like it's yesterday, was it centuries, and my mind's away. Without you, I keep it in. Without you, without you, it's definite.
Good evening. Good evening, Roland. Welcome to the 2018 Justice for Women Lecture at the University of Maine School of Law. You already know how proud I am to be dean at this law school, but I'll say it a couple of more times. The poignant footage of Aleppo, Syria playing as you took your seats is entitled Syria. The video and musical score were produced by Austin, Texas musician Casey McPherson for episode 4 of his series, The Case Sessions, an experimental series in which he confronts complex issues through the creation of music. I want to thank so many of you for coming out this evening to have a critical discussion about the Syrian war and how it impacts us in Maine. While seemingly far away, the war in Syria has implications for us all. At a fundamental level, our humanity is at stake. How we respond or not will measure our resolve as one people to fight injustice in any sphere. My name is Danielle Conway, and I'm the proud dean of the University of Maine School of Law. And as usual, before we get started, I want to recognize everyone who stands for justice, and that means to recognize our legislative leaders and our judiciary. So please stand when I call your name. Senator Angus King. And then for everyone else, please hold your applause. So, I also want to recognize Bethany Bozang representing Shelley Pingree's office and Maine Attorney General Janet Mills. And let me thank the Chief Justice of the Maine Supreme Judicial Court, Chief Justice Lee Softly, Chief Judge Nancy Torreson, Justice Joyce Wheeler, Judge William Kayada, Judge John A. Woodcock, Jr., and former Chief Justice Daniel E. Wathen. And now I'd like to recognize from the Maine State Legislature and the Portland and Westbrook City officials, Representative Rachel Talbot Ross, Councilor Pius Ali, Councilor Jill Dusson, and Westbrook Chief of Police Janine Roberts. I also want to recognize my boss. That would be President Glenn Cummings, President of the University of Southern Maine, and his leadership staff. And my loyal and dedicated staff, faculty, and students, and the devoted members of the University of Maine School of Law Foundation Board and the Maine Law Board of Visitors. And as you know, it is my habit now to recognize all of those who are here who serve justice around the globe. This includes many people who now identify as immigrants, refugees, or asylum seekers here in Maine. So, if you fall into one of those categories and you are here and were a former judge from another country, please stand up and be recognized. So I'd like to take this time to recognize Kathy Lee. Kathy Lee and the Lee family have been the engine, the power, the force behind Justice for Women and the lecture series. We owe the origin of this series to Kathy Lee's grit and determination to bring the stories of women to our shores. Thank you, Kathy Lee. Through her vision, and efforts and the tireless work of the JFW team, Maine has had privileged access to women who are on the front lines of the global struggle for justice. The Justice for Women lecture is one of the signature events that the law school produces each year. We at the University of Maine School of Law do something that no other legal education institution is doing across the nation. We celebrate the equality and justice that belongs to women and girls. Over the past 7 years of JFW, Maine law has been able to bring Zaina Anwar from Malaysia, Lindiwe Sibanda from Zimbabwe, Ruchira Gupta from India, Dr. Seema Samar from Afghanistan, Nobel Peace Laureate Lema Bowie from Liberia, and the Honorable Unity Dow from Botswana. I know for a fact tonight we will be moved by Ms. Mariam Jalabi's lecture. This topic is important to Maine, and it is important to the rest of the nation. This lecture will cause us to reflect on our own fundamental questions and concerns about civil rights, human rights, equality, and justice. We need this discussion. But first, we need to acknowledge that the war in Syria is an assault on our collective humanity. We then need to have the courage to hear about the conditions on the ground in Syria that are confronting our neighbors, our sisters, our mothers, and daughters. But more importantly, we need this discussion tonight. We need it to learn about the courageous women in Syria and their fight to preserve family and community bonds against this war's daily, deadly barrage. You will hear much more and much better from Ms. Mariam Jalabi about the courage of women in Syria. But right now, I have the honor of introducing you to a woman of courage who is much closer to home and who is the 2018 recipient of the Justice for Women Courage is Contagious Award. The Courage is Contagious Award is presented annually to an outstanding woman leader who demonstrates a commitment to the mission of the Justice for Women lecture series, which is to raise awareness in Maine about the injustices that women and girls face globally and locally. I am proud to present this year's Courage is Contagious Award to Dr. Joyce Taylor Gibson. Dr. Gibson is Dean of the Lewiston-Auburn College at the University of Southern Maine. Prior to 2009, Dr. Gibson was an associate professor in the Leadership and Schooling program within the Graduate School of Education at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. Dr. Gibson earned her PhD in Educational Administration from the University of Florida in Gainesville, her master's in Rehabilitation Counseling from George Washington University, and her BS in Psychology from Howard University. She is an experienced leader in student affairs, community, university partnerships, and organizational change, with social justice as her lens. Dr. Gibson's awards and writings have focused on access and support for underrepresented and first-generation students in higher education. She is also a prominent service leader in Maine, making significant contributions to work of ACLU of Maine as a member of the Board of Directors and to both the Charter Commission and the Chamber of Commerce. But I'd like to share a little something about Dr. Joyce that I know. Dr. Joyce is positive, yet no nonsense, collaborative, and still no nonsense, and is one of the most formidable forces in championing the underdog. She believes in all of her students, advocates for equity and equality throughout Lewiston-Auburn community, and empowers the women in her sphere, including me, to be strong leaders for the future. Congratulations, Dr. Gibson, and welcome to the stage to accept the 2018 Courage is Contagious Award.
Thank you very much. This was quite a surprise for me. In fact, the little story is, I said to Danielle, you know, I'm transitioning from being dean after 9 years back to the faculty. And so I'll see Mariam when she comes out to Lewiston, but I can't be there tonight. She called me and said, what? So here I am, and I thank you all so much. I want to thank Kathy and the Justice for Women organization for making this recognition possible. And thank Danielle for making sure I got here. Just have a little update for Kathy. I won't give you all the details, but based on our last phone call and our interaction, a coalition of women in Lewiston, including a couple of school committee members, a couple of immigrant leaders of nonprofit organizations, an ELL leader in the middle school and an after-school program director, have met a couple of times, and we are actually making progress on reducing the harassment of Muslim girls and other people in the high school during the day. So we are making progress. It's really good. So it's been an honor for me to serve Mainers, especially in the greater Lewiston-Auburn area, through my role as USM's Dean of the Lewiston-Auburn College. The commitment and passion of people in LA to change the lives of our students, our community, and our business leaders is truly commendable. And we have accomplished so much, and I look forward now as a faculty member in the fall to continuing our collaborations. I thank God for my parents who taught my siblings and me about doing the right thing and standing up for others. I want to give a special thanks to my husband, Roland, whose love and support keep me grounded, and I will continue my work. Thank you. Oh my God.
So, no nonsense. It is my pleasure now to introduce Senator Angus S. King, Jr., who will introduce our lecturer, Ms. Mariam Jalabi. Senator Angus King is a former lawyer, journalist, and entrepreneur, and is Maine's first independent senator. He was the 72nd governor of Maine from 1995 to 2003. He serves on the Armed Services Committee, the Select Committee on Intelligence, the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, the Committee on the Budget, and the Committee on Rules and Administration. Senator King has worked with Democrats and Republicans to strengthen America's national security, conducted critical oversight of the nation's intelligence community, advocated for policies that contribute to cleaner, cheaper energy and mitigation of climate change, stood up against the corrosive effect of unchecked money in politics, fought to improve access to health care, pushed to strengthen the government's support of veterans, and promoted increased access to critical community resources like rural broadband. In his free time, Senator King enjoys exploring the Maine's outdoors, either on his Harley or with his family in their camper. Please welcome Senator King.
Thank you so much. The spirit and the emotion and the community in this room tonight makes me so proud to be from Maine. Thank you all for what you do for this state. In Washington, sometimes people say, what is so special about Maine? Why do you like it so much? And I say, well, it's because Maine is a big, small town with very long streets. And we know each other and we care about each other. You stop at the New Jersey Turnpike for gas and you see a Maine license plate on the other car. Where are you from? Waterville. No Joe Jabber, he's my cousin. And I tell them that, you know, Maine is a wonderful place where we don't lock our cars except in September. Well, I don't know about you. I always lock my car in September because if you don't, somebody is liable to fill it up with zucchini. I hate it when they do that. But tonight is a sense of community, and that really is what's extraordinary. And sometimes I don't think we realize what we have unless we go someplace else. This is unusual what we have in Maine and the spirit that we have. I especially want to acknowledge, before I introduce our guest, Kathy Lee. This is Kathy's baby. And Kathy and I have known each other for probably 20 years. She went with me on a trade mission to Brazil and Argentina. And I'll never forget a moment. We were in the car sweeping through a large city called Belo Horizonte. And we were going through, and there were police, and the lights were, you know, we went through the red lights and everything. And I said, what the hell's going on? And Kathy said, this is for you. It was pretty cool. I think the funniest moment I ever had, though, on a trade mission was my first one to Japan, where I was invited to speak to a large group of people and on a stage much like this, and above me was a banner in Japanese, in kanji. And I didn't know what it said, and I started to speak. The people were looking at me sort of odd, but I didn't know what that was all about until I got home. And I showed a picture of that speech to a friend of mine who spoke Japanese, and he burst into laughter, and he said, don't you know what that sign said? I said, no. He said, well, they had a perfectly good word in Japanese for king, but Angus was a problem, so the sign said, welcome large black cow king. That's an absolutely true story. I'm delighted that Kathy invited me today. I want to just lay a little groundwork for our speaker. When I was first elected to the Senate and appointed to the Armed Services Committee in the summer of 2013, Carl Levin, who was the chair of the committee, asked me to join him on a trip to the Middle East. It was just he and I. And we went to Turkey and Jordan, which was as near as we could get into Syria at that time, and went to refugee camps on both sides. And what came through to me was the power of the human spirit. In these refugee camps, they were mostly packing, you know, those big things that they used to ship things overseas, the big boxes, big metal boxes. That's what they were. Those were the houses, and some tents. But what we saw were kids playing soccer. We saw makeshift schools. People wanted to talk about America and talk about what was going on. And these were people who had had to flee their country. And this was early. It's only gotten worse since then. But the spirit of those people was so powerful, and it really touched Carl Levin and I. And we spent pretty much a couple of days in these camps. The other piece that I want to convey is from my work in my committees of armed services and intelligence. The conflict in Syria is one of the most complicated that I have ever encountered. In fact, a few weeks ago, I'm not making this up, I was in an intelligence committee briefing on Syria. And the briefers were talking about all that was going on, and I drew a matrix by hand on my notebook. And I listed all the countries that are involved and all the elements that are involved in this conflict and who was a friend and who was an enemy of whom. I'll try to do it geographically. I may forget somebody. Turkey, the Kurds, ISIS, 1,200 opposition groups, including al-Nusra, which is related to al-Qaeda, the Assad regime, the Americans, the Russians, the Iranians. And when you start to put all the relationships, for example, we're with the Iranians and the Russians against ISIS, but against the Iranian and Russians because we're against Assad. I mean, it is unbelievably complicated, but it's also very simple. And the simple part is, it's a gigantic human tragedy. Because of all these groups, of all this politics, the human cost is incalculable, and I think you're going to share it with us. Hundreds of thousands of people have died, millions of people displaced, some into other countries, but many within the country of Syria. And Damascus, 20 years ago, was a vibrant, exciting, literate, important city. And now it's a war zone. And I think we have to remind ourselves what caused this, and what caused this was bad leadership. A person who was willing to see his people die and be brutalized and displaced in order to hold on to some semblance of power. It's an absolute human tragedy, and I can tell you from someone who was involved, and we were constantly trying to figure out how can we help. And there were no good answers, no good answers. But the person we're going to hear from tonight is somebody who is supplying answers from the individual point of view of a real person who's trying to make change. And by the way, this is about women and women making change. I do want to leave you with one piece of good news. It has nothing to do with Syria, but it's something I just learned today. Talk about women making change. 2 years ago, you know Emily's List, the group that supports women running for office? 2 years ago, Emily's List had 900 applicants for funding. This year, 34,000. And I think women and young people are going to change America this fall. I really honestly believe that. Now, how do we make change? We make change in a lot of ways, in politics and military and all those kinds of things, but ultimately, we make change one person at a time. In 1966, one of my personal heroes, Robert F. Kennedy, went to South Africa. And South Africa at that time was the country of apartheid. It was one of the most repressive regimes in the world. And he made a very courageous speech. And he talked in that speech about how change occurs. And it was the first thought I had, and I hope I can remember it, but it was the first thought I had when I read about you and what you're doing. And here's what Robert Kennedy said. It's through numberless, diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped. Each time a person stands up for an ideal, reaches out to improve the lot of others, or fights against injustice, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope. And crossing each other from a million different centers of daring and energy, those ripples build up a wave that will sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Our guest tonight, Mariam, a ripple of hope. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh my God. Thank you so much, Senator. That was amazing. Thank you, Maine. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, all of the people who made this possible for me to be here and to talk about Syria. I grew up in a little village in the Golan Heights, playing on trees and running the fields. I didn't realize when I was a child what kind of a country I lived in until I started growing up and realizing a cousin of mine was imprisoned, and I started learning about the imprisonments of my uncle and of my father and of other relatives and friends. We were in the village because my family couldn't live in the city anymore because they were stripped of all of their human rights, and they had to go back to a village and survive on living on a farm. That village that I grew up in was bombed and shelled in 2012 by the government forces, and my family had to flee, had to completely leave. This happened for the rest of my family. However, I did leave Syria much earlier. That's why I speak good English. 20 years ago, before that, my dad left even earlier because he had to leave. He was forced to leave. He was imprisoned so many times that he's realized that he will not be able to continue his life living in this country, that he had to leave to protect his family and to protect himself. And that was in the 70s. I sit today in meetings with heads of states, with foreign ministers, and I discuss the case of Syria with Security Council members. And I think about those days when I grew up in that little village, when I was roaming, climbing trees and roaming fields. And I think, how did I get here? What is it that I did? And I feel this very heavy weight and responsibility for me to relay the message of Syrian people and what Syrians want. And I remember, and I always, this is what strikes me and it keeps me on going, is that I am still that child who wanted to be free, who wanted to climb the trees that she wanted and do whatever she wanted, regardless of gender, and regardless of what my political ideas may be, or my vision of the world. So I feel powerful standing up and saying that Syrian people want the same rights that everyone else in the world has. We want the right to vote, to choose our president. We want to have the flexibility to express our ideas without the fear of being detained, tortured, and put in prison. We want to be able to Facebook our friends and, WhatsApp and Skype without being monitored by the regime and get arrested for saying the wrong words. This is how it was in Syria. In 2003, my cousin was arrested, was put in solitary confinement, and tortured for sending emails. When my family went up in arms and trying to look for him, trying to find where he was detained and what was happening to him, they told him, he was bringing down the integrity of the state because he sent few emails about the economic situation in Syria and some of the oil deals that the government was making to few of his family and friends. It's like, can you believe it was one email and it went to 10 people? Really? This was 2003, when people were emailing hundreds and hundreds of people in one email. It was not a big deal to email 10 people, but to them, that felt like a threat. In Syria, you could not legally come together for more than 3 to 5 people unless you had a permit from the regime. And because I want to make the story of Syria human and relate to what's happening in the world, I want to share it from a very personal perspective, from stories that I know, people that I've worked with, people that I know, the things that influenced me and things that have made me do the things that I do. But before I go into my little presentation, I want to talk about how amazing and how wonderful it has been for me to spend the last couple of years here in Maine. Thank you for having me, for welcoming me with such open hearts, for listening to me and giving me ideas. I have been into different places, and I need to remember everyone to thank every one of you. I want to thank you for having me, the University of New England, UNE, with the wonderful, amazing program that you're doing, Mofalo, and all of her people, and the people with her, and the faculty and the students who welcomed me and explained to me and told me about what they're doing, the cultural integration program, which we all need. I was listening to them and I thought, I need to take that class. I need to take that course. Thank you. I was at Deering High School. What an amazing experience. I got the key to Maine from Deering High School. Thank you. I was in awe, and it was my first key to any city. So here I come, Maine. I have your key. I went to Edward Little High School. Beautiful experience, diverse students, smart students who know what kind of questions to ask, what kind of comments to give. I went to Westbrook to Ikhlas Ahmed's class, and that was beautiful. I received letters of love from the class. It was letters that they had written to send to children in Syria. People they didn't know. They don't know Syrian children who are in refugee camps. They wrote these letters so that children there can feel and see maybe what they're feeling for them. These are children who have suffered themselves and who have heard bullets and have seen family members die. I am going to take those letters back with me, and I'm going to send them to children that I know that are in refugee camps. Thank you. I went to see IEE, and it was a wonderful audience who was listening and gave me the courage to keep talking more about what it meant to be Syrian and women, a woman. Not just a Syrian woman, but a woman in a global setup. Thank you for having me. And then I have to say the amazing Tree Street Youth Center. Thank you for that amazing idea. I was so inspired being there, listening to Julia when she's telling me I'm like, how do you control kids? What do you do when they come, when they go? And she told me it's all self-led. And it struck a bone in my head. It's like, how is it self-led? And then she's explained to me, when you give responsibility to these kids, they behave. It's amazing. It's an amazing idea. I would love to take these ideas back home with me to the people that I work with. Thank you, Kathy, for giving me all of that opportunity to meet all of these amazing and wonderful people so that when I stand here today and talking about Syria, I have that connection to the people here. I start with this slide that says the Syrian people know their way. And it's a woman in the picture. It says, "O Syrian women, revolt against all tyranny." Being a woman living in a world where politics and policy are run by men, I feel, with a lot of women from Syria, that we women need to make a difference and change the dynamics of power. Therefore, revolting against the regime is also revolting against tyranny, patriarchy, military rule, and military power. Our senator talked beautifully here about how military power and involvement in Syria has completely destroyed it. I want to tell you about women that I know, my friends. This is Yusr Bitar, who's leading a demonstration in Washington, D.C. for the Syrian people. This is women in Damascus who were leading demonstrations when it first started. And you see them covering their faces, and that's because they could not be recognized by the regime, because if they were recognized by the regime in any pictures or any videos, they were the fear that would be arrested, tortured. These are Christian women who are demonstrating with the same flag. There is this illusion sometimes that, oh, it's a civil war what's happening in Syria. It's a sectarian war what's happening in Syria. And in reality, it's a dictatorship killing his own people. And people from every walk of society, every sect and every religion have come together to say, no, this is not right. We want our rights as one people. So when people came out to the street at first, the first chants that they were carrying and talking about was 111 Syrian people are one. Here are people, the Kurdish people in the north, people from Amuda, from the north, who are coming out with the same kind of flags and saying, and this is the Friday of the Brothers of Blood, because they were coming out and saying that nobody should be killed, nobody's blood should be spilled in Syria. More demonstrations that's carrying all kinds of flags, and at the bottom you can see all of the different cities that were being bombed in Syria that the women had carried and are at the forefront. And I want you to pay attention, the veiled and not veiled, and they're all together standing in line. And God knows what each religion and sect they're coming from, each one of them. I like this picture because I get here and I like to explain also a veiled and a non-veiled woman. They're carrying the flag of the revolution. And it's called the Friday of the Syrian Revolutionary Women. And I want to explain a little bit about this Friday thing. When the revolution first started, people used to go to mosques, congregate in mosques. Like I said earlier, it was illegal for people to come together unless they had a permit from the government in quantities more, like in people more than 5. So what people used to do is that they used to go to mosques, whether they were Muslim or not. It could be Christian, Druze, Alawite, it didn't matter. You wanted to come out in a demonstration. Friday is the day off for us. They go and congregate in mosques, and then the demonstration starts out of the mosques into the street. And those were after the Friday prayers. And every Friday was called a name. And there were different names, creative names. People were feeling like desperate about certain thing or hopeful about certain thing, and they would name that Friday with that name. And this is the Friday of the Syrian Revolutionary Women. They had many other Fridays, but this one I like. These are women, I call them the Feminists, my feminist group, that were led by Rima Dali, a friend, a wonderful, amazing young woman, who in Damascus used the idea of being a bride, being appreciated for being a bride, a mother, you know, the whole concept of a young girl getting married. And she said, well, yes, I want to get married, but I want you to stop the bloodshed before that. So she and friends dressed in bride's clothing, and they went out. They painted out on those banners, cloth banners, and said, stop the killing. And here is more. They walked all around the city. The same Rima Dali wore a red dress and got a bucket of white paint and dropped it all on herself. The whole ideas of purity, blood, and innocence used in these campaigns that these young women used were very powerful because it got a lot of attention. She said, stop the killing. We want to build a Syria for all Syrians. And here comes also one thing that I really love about what happened with the revolution, is that people started expressing themselves by writing on the wall. And this was very significant for us Syrians because anything that was written on the walls before was either the picture of the president or raising and hailing the president, the father, and the amazing and how much we love him and all of that. So when the revolution started, people started writing different things on the wall. And this says, I am not ashamed. I am the one the revolution stands on her shoulder. I'm the one whose revolution stands on her shoulders. Or I'm the shoulders for the revolution. Excuse my English. Here is another sign that's talking about, you are my mom, you are my sister, you are my daughter, and you are my friend. You are my Syria. The whole idea about when we describe women, we feminists sometimes think we're not just the sisters and the mothers, you know, and your friend, we're actually independent human being. But the way these posters and the culture has used to come out with ways of talking about women's liberation is very poignant. It says it's my Syria, being a mother and a sister and a daughter. Some more. It says no violence against women. Women started becoming very creative and saying all of the things that they felt was representing them and strong for them. It says a woman is a mother, but she's a nation also. Do not oppress her. Here is also one of my favorites. It says, down with. And this is very significant, this word, because when we first came out in the revolution, we said down with the regime and down with this and down with that. So they're saying in this placard, it says, down with anyone who steps on my dignity or who puts down my dignity. So women came out talking about who they were and what they wanted. And freedom starts with freedom of women first. That's what this one says. This is Women's Day, March 8th. It says March 8th, it's not for the celebration of Women's Day. It is about fighting oppression of women in all of its shapes. And this is a great one also. This is what explains a little bit more about how graffiti started becoming part of the culture of the revolution. And I like this one. And you can see also like how this young girl has her face covered because she doesn't want to be known. They're saying revolt because revolution is female. In Arabic, like in some languages, you have masculine and feminine nouns. So thawra, which is a revolution in Arabic, it's female. So she's saying revolt because revolution is female. This is another one on the wall of one of the women organizations that shows also, well, okay, we're not going to exclude you men. Us calling for women's rights means that we, all us, are working together. It says, hand in hand, we will rebuild it. And you see the man and the woman standing there together. This is another one that I like that came out also, is that this whole idea about, oh, it's Muslims who want to take over extremists. Now we have a secular government, you know, that's protecting rights, you know, of minorities. And we want a liberal government, like who's going to replace Assad? It's all of these, you know, Islamists. So there's this woman who are dressed in complete, like, covered up clothing in black, and the other friend next to her, and it says, I and I, both of them, they're saying, we are the daughters of the revolution. So these young women giving lessons about what it means to be a revolutionary. It's about human rights, respecting everyone equally. Here's one also that is culturally very well known in the Arab world, a show that shows on TV that's called Women Soft Talk. And they're subverting that woman soft talk, which usually is not, when it's not mentioned in the most positive way. It's like, oh, woman talk. But this placard says it's only that soft woman talk that's going to solve the Syrian crisis. This is another one about Jabhat al-Nusra. There's Nusra Front, the affiliate of Al-Qaeda, that has changed its name many times, and now it's something completely different. But at that time, this placard says, to you, Jabhat al-Nusra, anybody who kills any one of us, any Syrian, is a traitor. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you call yourself. Anyone who's killing any Syrian is a traitor and cannot rule and cannot be our leader in this country. says, this is a woman in the revolution is a reality. Accept it. It's not a myth. She exists. These are women who are saying, yes, bomb us. We would rather that than being humiliated. This is where the strength of identity and the strength of dignity comes in with these young women coming out. Again, you see, they're all covering their faces. This is a story I like to tell of this woman who is a sample of what women started doing in Syria. Once the revolution started and there were very scarce resources and access to food or water or any of that stuff, it became very difficult. With the war, the regime had actually besieged entire communities, not allowing aid in or any kind of supplies, medical supplies, that created dire situations. The estimates up until today, there are over 1 million people are still besieged. Today, there is the part next to Damascus, the capital, there has been cities besieged that now they are bombing to annihilation and getting people out. So the creativity of the people on the ground, you could see through this woman who started this oven bakery, that what she's building there, what she's putting together with the help of her neighbors is an oven, is a mud oven to bake bread and other goods in. And she started it as a business, and she started to help her family first, and then it became a business, and she was helping her whole community. And this is just one example of how women have been amazingly helpful on the ground. They're the ones who deliver aid, they're the ones who take care of the children, they're the ones who educate children, they're the ones who collect garbage, they're the ones who are rebuilding the houses, they're the ones who are doing most of the work on the ground. And then I go to two of my friends. The one on the right, Yahya Shurbaji, is a non-violence activist, a leader of the earlier demonstrations that had happened in Syria. And he was out giving flowers and water to the soldiers that were coming and shooting at them. He was arrested, and we don't know what happened to him until today. He was arrested by the government forces in September 2011. On the left is Razan Zaytouni, a lawyer, a human rights lawyer who worked her entire life to save political detainees. This is way before the revolution, because the Assad regime has been brutalizing people all along, and that's why people came out in demonstrations and in a revolution. She used to help all of the people who were in prison to try to get them their rights. When the Syrian revolution started, she refused to leave, and she was working with the Center for Documentation of Violations in Syria, and she was documenting the violations of everyone, not just the regime, anybody who documented. She was abducted in December 2013. We don't know who abducted her. She, her husband, and two of her friends, Nazim Hamada, Wa'il Hamada, and Samira Khalil. They were all gone overnight. We don't know what happened to them. Pray for both of them, send them positive thoughts. These are two of 250,000 people who have disappeared in Assad prisons. There are another 150,000 people who we don't know what happened to or where they are. These two, we know they didn't make it. The one on the left, Ghayath Matar, was arrested the same time that Yahya Shurbaji was arrested. Ghayath Matar was one of the people who's giving flowers and water to the soldiers and trying to calm things down so that they could have demonstrations and more demonstrations. They believed in the non-violence means, 100%. His body was given back to his family 3 days later, tortured, signs of torture on him, with cigarette butt burns on him. His wife was pregnant, 6 months at the time. His child now is 6 years. The one on the right, Nabil Shurbaji, is the cousin of Yahya Shurbaji. He was imprisoned, and we didn't know what happened to him. We didn't hear anything of him, but then we got the news for sure from one of the people who came out. that he died in prison, that he was tortured to death. He was tortured to death and killed in 2015. We didn't know about it until 2017, until that person who told on his story came out and told us. This is a little bit more brighter story. Usama Nassar is friends with Yahya Shirbaji and Ghayath Matar and Razan Zaytouni, and he's still in Ghouta, which is the suburb of Damascus that I just told you about, that's being bombed. And that's his wife, Maymuna, whose two brothers were also imprisoned in 2011, and we don't know what happened to them. These people are still inside, and they're trying by every means possible to resist the government with civil disobedience, with strikes, with anything that they can do on the ground to keep the motivation for people. They refuse to leave. They say, this is our country and we're going to stay. They're on the wanted terrorist list. And going back to more of the people that came out in the streets. Again, going back, this is not about Islam. This is not about one part of Syria. This is northern Syria demonstration with the Kurds carrying their Kurdish flag along with the Syrian Revolution flag. And women in the south, the people of Damascus, were coming out in demonstrations. It didn't matter whether you're veiled or not, Muslim or not, you're coming against tyranny, calling for human rights and freedoms. Even older women participated at the beginning when we had demonstrations where people were out asking for freedoms. Young women demonstrated, young men demonstrated. Everybody was on the street before it became the armed conflict that it became. Some of the other things that women are doing also is campaigns, different campaigns to help their sisters, their families. Is this campaign, it's called Refugees, Not Concubines. And this is in response to the trend that started happening where elder men or wealthy men who would go and give a lot of money and marry underage children, underage girls in refugee camps, because their fathers and mothers and families were so destitute and they needed the help they can get. They will take the money and get their daughters married off. So this campaign was to create awareness and to help the families, actually maybe financially, morally, in the way that they needed, so that they were not getting involved in such transactions. This is another campaign that women did, which is about drawing attention to what's happening to the detainees. Because one of the biggest crises and one of the biggest issues in Syria is the disappearances of people. People are not just getting bombed and killed, but they also disappear on a daily basis until today. People get arrested and detained arbitrarily. They get executed in prisons. We don't know who survives, who doesn't. Like I mentioned earlier, the few cases that I said. So these are women who came out on a bus and are going all around Europe holding the pictures of their beloved ones who are in prison. Here's the bus, set them free. It includes women like Fadwa Mahmoud. Fadwa Mahmoud was imprisoned herself many times. Her husband and her son are now in prison, and she does not know where they are. Fadwa Mahmoud, you could see her, the second from the left. And then you see Amna Kholani on the right with the hijab, who also has her brothers imprisoned. The cousin of Yahya Shirbaji, who's on the far right carrying his picture. These are people who are coming out, carrying the pictures of their beloved one and asking where they are. Here is one of the slides that I'm going to end with, is that it says, I am not a burden. I am the foundation for the revolution, and I will stay here. And this was carried by women who are coming out in demonstrations in Syria. And just to wrap it all up, I want to go back to when Syrian women came out in 1946, when they were calling for the independence from the French rule. And since then, women have not stopped forcing their opinions and ideas to the forefront and making a change in Syria. And at that time is when the revolutionary flag or the independence flag was introduced. Later on, the Ba'ath Party came in with the Assad regime, and they changed the flag of Syria to the flag that officially today is used. So when we came out with the revolution, when people started asking for freedom and dignity, they came out back to the independence flag. And I tried to wear the colors of the independence flag, which is green, black, and red stars. I will stop here. Please give me comments, give me questions. I am here to entertain any kind of ideas that you may have of how we can find maybe a solution for the intractable crisis that's happening in Syria. And thank you for having me here.
Should we go sit here?
Should we go sit? Thank you, Maine.
We're going to take questions, and I'm going to start with the first one.
Yes, please.
You are the representative of the Syrian Opposition Coalition at the United Nations. What is it you're doing there?
When the Syrian Opposition Coalition was formed in 2012, November 2012, they came to me and they asked me, and they said, you keep complaining about women not being included, that there aren't enough women in the opposition or making decisions for Syria. We really want to open an office in New York that can work with us with the United Nations. Will you run it for us? Will you be there for us? I'm like, yes. Where is Ikhlas, who said yes to everything? I said yes, I remember that. Is that I did feel fear if I was going to be able to represent the Syrian story, the Syrian case, but I took courage from the fact that there were so many people out there who did not have the privilege and the advantages that I had to carry this burden, and I had to take it. But I had one condition. And I told them this. I said, you're calling upon me as a woman, so I need to make this office also work on the inclusion of women and marginalized voices. And that's how I'm going to come and help you. And that was 6 years ago. So we, as an office, myself as a representative, we take all of the voices from the ground of what's happening with all of the different groups, with all of the different society groups, with individuals, and with our organizations, the political organizations that are representing the Syrian people who want to create a democratic and pluralistic and an inclusive state to represent them to the United Nations. So we create events with the Security Council, we do events with the General Assembly, we bring in delegations to go and talk to the different states and the different missions explaining the Syria case so that we may find a solution, a better solution, and get the Syrian voices heard.
Thank you. Let's open it up to questions. There are mics on either side if you want to line up if you have a question. Up in the balcony, there's a mic over here as well. Step up if you have questions.
I will tell you a little bit more about what I do. So until people come up with the questions and come front. When I took the office, one of the things that we tried to do is include women in all possible ways, because we believe, the people that I was working with, is that unless all of society is represented at all its levels, you will not be able to create a state that was democratic and inclusive and representative. When you have 50% of society not represented in the right amount, then it's not a good state that you're creating. So we've tried many times to to have conferences, to push for the inclusion of women, to their Syrian Feminist Lobby, the Syrian Feminist Network. I'm part of all of those different feminist organizations and women's organizations, but it wasn't happening. So more recently, we Syrian women came together, a few of us came together, 30 of us to start with, and then it grew to much more. We started something that's called the Syrian Women's Political Movement, because we've realized women are always put in a corner, which is like civil society, humanitarian aid, and advisors, to the men who are making the final decisions. We decided that's no longer acceptable, and in order for us to be at the forefront and to sit at the table, we need to create a political organization that had policy and strategies about what we want for future Syria at all levels, for the transitional governing body, for the transition period, for the constitution, how we want the constitution to be, how the elections should be held, and how we need to deal with terrorism. So this has been established, and I'm part of it. I'm one of the founders of it. And we have pushed to have more women included in their representation at the tables, the negotiation tables at Geneva. And we have been able, with the support of many other women also, to raise the percentage of women representation from 5%, 3%, 5%, 6% max, to 15%. And just to put this in context, women representation in negotiations, at mediations, and peace talks have been the average of 9%. So we're much higher than that. However, when you're also thinking about women's representation globally in governments and where they are in decision making, they are at 18%. In the Senate, we have 22% in the United States, which has just hit a record high. So having 15% for us seems quite good, and we hopefully will keep on going, and hopefully we'll make it 50% soon.
Yes.
So thank you for being here. And I guess I'll preface with there's probably a reluctance to ask questions because Syria is such an overwhelming issue. Where do we begin, right? What questions to even ask? So my question is that in your position, and you've been there for 6 years now, you've had some time to think about it and get your legs under you. You could address issues from a local issue, just making sure people have food, water, and clothes, all the way to the global world peace issue. So where in your organization with limited resources and what you're doing, when you sit down to have those conversations, what are our priorities? It sounds like clearly number one is women being involved, but how do you begin to channel resources of other agencies or groups that you're working with? What do you begin just working with giving people basic human needs, or do you focus on global political issues? Where do you go, and what's that conversation like?
Very smart question. Should I answer or take others?
Go ahead and answer.
Well, I know it's a big question, so just do what you can.
It's a big question, but I have a very simple answer to it. All that's happening in Syria right now is happening because we have a dictatorship, because we have a government that is killing its own people. 90% of the destruction that has happened in Syria is at the hands of the regime and its allies. Putting out humanitarian aid, trying to empower women, and all of that work that we are doing on the side and working with all of the international organizations is all at the periphery to try to help create a space for when there is a solution for Syria, things are not completely collapsed, that we can actually feed into rebuilding the country. But we are not going to be able to get there unless we solve the Syrian crisis by putting a limit to the regime that's there killing its own people. And this is in the hands of the international community. All of the people who got involved, as so was well described by the senator, like all of the different groups, all of the different governments who got involved. It's because we have a government, we have a regime that's unable to take care of its people. So everybody got involved, everybody came in to try to make a solution according to their own interests and what they think should be happening in Syria. That's not the solution. The solution is that we need to force this government, this regime, to come in full faith, feeling completely threatened by the international community, to the negotiation table so that we can have a transitional governing body, a transitional period where Syrian people make their own decisions and create their own constitution, have their own elections. It's as simple as that.
Lois.
It's a big problem to figure out what question to start with. There isn't a good one for me. I want to know what each of us as individuals, both as individuals and in the context of the institutions that surround our lives, how we can help push the agenda that you have articulated, which is basically regime change in Syria. And frankly, I don't think regime change is a good idea. I think, a new kind of government feels like a better idea to me. But in some ways, I want to know, I don't want to go home feeling, oh, this is terrible. It's too big. There's nothing I can do. There have to be small steps that each of us can take to start a motion in this state and in our institutions. I'm in the state government here, I'm in the legislature. And, I want to know what it is that I might be able to do other than try to keep the horrible anti-refugee stuff that happens in this state, and it does happen, to prevent that from happening. But I don't want to just prevent. I want to ask you what we can do to forward the humanitarian future that is necessary for, frankly, feminism and other institutions to survive both in Syria and here. I don't know even if that was a question. I mean, it's like, it's so hard to articulate, but I think you get my drift.
No, thank you. It's a very important subject. Are we asking for a regime change? What we're asking is for a democratic, pluralistic, civic society that is elected in Syria. We want a state that respects its human rights and every citizen is equal under the law, that's not killing its people to start with. So what we're asking for is a transitional governing body. We want this regime to come to the negotiation table. In order for this regime to come to the negotiation table, it will take an international will. It will take the threat of use of force, of limited use of force by the international community to bring it to the table. If that is not done, we're going to be seeing the same thing continuing for a very long time and reaching a point where it's just the Assad regime has taken over and no sight for having a democratic structure happening. I mean, there are so many things that we can all do. There are two levels. There's a level where if you feel you don't want to get politically involved, you don't want to call your senators, your representatives, your government, people who you feel may have an influence on what this very powerful hegemonic country in the world can do. There's so much leadership that the United States can have in the world that now has given it completely to Russia. Russia now is sitting at the Security Council that has today vetoed 11 resolutions on Syria. One of them was just a reference to the ICC, to the International Criminal Court. Others about just a humanitarian aid. We were so happy when they did not veto a resolution that actually allowed cross-border aid, meaning that aid, food and medical supplies can go through the borders from the neighboring countries inside Syria. We were so happy when that was passed and the Russians did not veto it. That's at one level. You can talk to your government, to the representatives. I'm so happy. Senator King is here today to hear this. We need to do more. We are a country based on human rights. We are a country that believes in democracy. No matter how sad I was, I have to be honest with you, when Trump won, that night I was in tears, and then I kind of caught myself, and I thought, no, this is okay because it's a democratic country. He will be out in 4 years. If he's not out in 4 years, he will be out in 8 years, and that's it. We don't have that choice in Syria. The Assad regime has been ruling since before I was born, since 1970. The father was dying, so they changed the constitution to accommodate of the incoming son, who was at the time only 34. The constitution said that a president of Syria had to be at least 40. They changed the constitution in 8 minutes in parliament. And it was funny because the new article that was amended, it said that a president can start being a president starting at the age of 34. It didn't go 32, it didn't go 30. They didn't wait a year and say maybe 35. It was 34. That's the kind of government we have. But ranting about that, I want to go to the next step where what can we do here aside from getting involved politically in the US and calling upon the US leadership to take its leadership in the world. The other thing you can do is that there's so many amazing organizations that are working on the ground, that are helping children, that are giving education, that are building shelters, that are providing humanitarian aid. And there are so many organizations aside from the big INGOs that are like, if you trust more, the big INGOs, the International Rescue Committee, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Peace Corps, Save the Children, so many different organizations. But I want to name 2 organizations that are dear to my heart, that maybe you've heard of one of them. One of them is called the White Helmets. The White Helmets had a movie made about them by Netflix last year, and they won the Oscars. These people are the ones, they're called white helmets because they wear their white helmets and they run into, say again?
Keep going.
Okay, so they go into areas where people are running away from. When a bomb comes down and destroys a building and people are under the rubble, these white helmets run in to save people, to give them medical aid, to try to see what they can do and how they pull them from under the rubble. And they're trained to do this. It's an organization that's working on the ground where they actually know that the regime has a tactic. When they hit the first bomb, when they throw the first artillery or bomb, whatever they do, and it kills people, they know that there's a group of people who are going to go try to save the ones who are caught under. They throw another one in 10 to 15 minutes. And these people, white helmets, know this, and they go in. You want to donate, you want to help these people, you go online, see it. White Helmets, they're a very well-known organization in Syria. Another organization that's amazing, it's doing educational job down on the ground in Syria, is called the Kerim Foundation. I'm so bad at Kerim Foundation. And yes. And it means the foundation of generosity. Go and donate to these organizations, and that's the least we as individuals maybe can do when we can't, go out and further and do more. This is just clicks on your computer. It would be amazingly helpful. Thank you.
I also want to add, I've heard you tell school children in the last couple of days that they can try to make some change in their own community, in their own schools, in their own lives that preserve dignity, that preserve human rights, and that has an impact.
Yes. I feel that as somebody who lives in North America and seeing what's happening in experiencing human rights and the struggles we're going through every day, like with the Women's March on Washington and March for Our Lives, Black Lives Matter. There's so many movements that are happening that are preserving the rights, the human rights that we have attained here in this country and try to make it better. So I did tell students, and I feel that this is a very strong idea, is that you being active in your own community and fighting for human rights within your own community, your own family sometimes, your own school, your own neighborhood, that has a trickling effect on the country and then later on globally, because that's what shapes nations, that's what shapes people, and it influences and goes beyond us to reach other nations and other people. Any little thing we do, it builds up, it adds up. Every one of us doing any little thing becomes a mountain later.
It's as Senator King
The
said.
Senator King said
Quoting
yeah.
Kennedy, yeah.
Yes,
I'll
yes.
never forget, Eklas mentioned in an earlier meeting this group of immigrant women that meet with women who are born here in Maine. And after the first Muslim ban, there was a meeting of this group of women, and the women from Maine were all agonizing over how awful this is and how threatening, and it's never been so bad. And to a woman, every immigrant woman around the table said, but you have all these rights that you have to preserve. And it was such a wake-up call for me to realize they see what we have. We stop seeing it. We need to make sure we keep that.
And we exercise our right.
Next question.
Hi, I also wanted to say thank you for being here tonight, and I had a question about, I guess, the political environment in Syria, and it's something you've touched on a little bit with explaining just how diverse the opposition really is, and explaining that the war is not a sectarian civil war, it's a war between a dictatorship and a people. I was curious if, in your understanding, are there any portions of the Syrian population that do believe the Assad propaganda that he is the defender of minorities, or that he is the line of defense against Daesh? And how do you communicate and try to fight that propaganda on the ground in Syria?
Yes, the dictatorship has supporters. There's no way one person can create the havoc that they're creating without having people who believe in what they're doing. So he has a big group of people around him. I mean, but there are levels and layers of loyalty. Some people have businesses and they have families and they have interests that they cannot just let go of. A lot of people have let go of that, but there are some people who haven't. So the whole idea of protecting minorities is such a myth, because they have killed and tortured and arrested everyone, even from the Alawite minority that the president himself is part of. So that idea is used as a propaganda by the regime itself to create this feeling to the international community, which has actually worked somewhat successfully, saying that people like me are the terrorists. I am on a wanted terrorist list in Syria, me and many of my colleagues, and that they're the liberal secular part. So there are people who succumb and who feed within that propaganda. But I want to tell something to people. When Obama had that red line, and it was crossed in August 2013 by using chemical weapons. In one night, the regime used sarin gas on the people in Ghouta and killed 1,500 people, 400 among them children, overnight. And if you remember that, when Obama had given the threat that they're going to use strikes against this regime, I remember hearing and feeling and knowing like there was a big commotion happening. And one of the things that was happening then is that a lot of the generals and people who were in the army with Assad started calling the opposition to try to defect. They wanted to leave the regime. They wanted to be away from such a regime that was going to be bombed and that's going to be striked by the international powers so that they cannot keep doing this. So there's so much that the regime has of support today because they're the ones who are winning territory on the ground. Definitely not moral territory, just land territory. So people are with the winner of the territory on the ground. So there are those different elements about who is standing with the regime right now, today, and supporting them. You have Russia and Iran who are 100% wholeheartedly are with him. Iran and Russia, and you know those two countries. And Hezbollah, a designated terrorist organization.
Let's go up to the balcony.
I'm a senior at Casco Bay High School, and recently, at the very beginning of the school year, we did a huge project on Syria to raise awareness about what was happening from the start of the 1970s all the way up until now, and we created a huge art exhibit, basically turned the entire school into a museum to show how we interpreted the issues going on there and how we wanted the international community to view what was happening in Syria and what we wanted to change about it. And then afterwards, it was like this huge, amazing thing had happened that we had all cultivated together, and then it was like it flatlined. And we all felt this really large, powerful energy that we wanted to do something, but we didn't really know what. Like, we had all this information and we created all these projects, but we didn't know what to do with it anymore. And so it just kind of dissipated, but I'll notice people will be like, oh, did you hear about what happened? Like, what can we do? We just want to know what can we do. And with the recent action taken by the students in Parkland for March for Our Lives, we're seeing more and more young people come together to create a movement and actually try to create real change. And I want to know, like, what can students do, especially in a place like Maine that's a little bit more distant but has such a rich community of people who want to do something. What can we do as students who may not have the right to vote or may not have funds but still have our voices? What can we do to help what's happening in Syria?
Next question?
Yeah. Go ahead and answer.
Just like a little bit ago when I said that everything you do in your community, when you're fighting for human rights for your neighbors who are here, who are maybe immigrants, when you're fighting for human rights for Black Lives Matter, Women's March, all of the things that you could do here that make people more equal and have more rights has a trickling effect to what happens in Syria. Once you are able to vote, you vote, or even now, you can send letters to your representatives. You can say, this is what we need and what we want. And you can do that, like having as a young person wanting to make an influence across the globe, you need to remember that you making an influence in your own environment, with your own family, with your own community, has actually an impact of what's gonna happen later on when you're an adult and you're a young adult, and then later on in your life, how you can see that change coming down to other people across the globe. Because human rights is not divisible. Human rights is for all humans. And us fighting for human rights here is like you're fighting for human rights over there. And you can always talk about Syria and the abuses that human rights that are happening and connect it to what you want to see here. It's completely different levels. We're fighting for the right to live in Syria, not just to vote any longer, but you can have so much power that you can get from knowing that you as a human being that has the power in this powerful country, that you can have an influence by you calling for rights, for international human rights, that it is influencing people across the globe.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you all to bear with me, but I want to say just a few words about Justice for Women and where we're going. But before I do that, please join me in thanking this very courageous woman, Mariam Jalabi.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Maine.
I just want to say thank you before everybody leaves to the community partners who made this possible. Mariam mentioned them, UNE, Mickey, Decca, Claudette, Mufalo, the women who came up with this idea to teach people who are studying health at UNE about cultural sensitivity and how to deal with different communities. Deering High School Principal Palmer, Assistant Principal Ahmed, teacher Sarah Schmidt. They brought the entire school into the gym to hear Mariam and to give her their ideas.
And the key.
And the key. The key came from the city. Although, as we were leaving, she worked 12 hours yesterday, going from school to school to school.
My honor, my honor.
And as we were heading back to the hotel, everybody a little exhausted, we passed a key bank. She said, "My key! My bank!" Every Little High School principal, Anir, teacher Erin Towns, and all the students who came out to ask questions, good questions. And it's these individual teachers who are making it happen in each of these schools with the support of their principals. Tree Street Youth, the Harwood Center at Bates College, Westbrook Middle School, and ECLAS, who brought us into her school, and Mariam talked about these letters of love that these children wrote, and it was so moving. They stood up and read these letters to her, telling about their own experiences of war and wanting to give hope to these students they don't even know. CIEE, it's these partners who've made this possible this year. The emails have been flooding into me all week. Mariam mentioned earlier she'd been here for 3 years. It feels like 3 years. It's only been 3 days. I also want to thank Ben Johnson, who did hours and hours of editing of that video that you saw when you first came in. Catherine Frost for the beautiful new brochures. And if you don't have one, pick one up on the way out. Danielle has told you, the dean has told you about all the different women we've brought to Maine over the last 7 years. We need to make this program permanent. We need a public-private partnership to make this happen. You probably don't know this, but 10% of the operating budget, 10%, and that's it, comes from the state of Maine for the law school. All the rest has to be raised. And so we need you to offer this program and many of the others that the law school is offering that are putting this law school on the map, creating incredible opportunities for the students here and helping the communities. Inside your program, you'll see the list of donors. Without these generous donors, we wouldn't be up here tonight. I want to see twice as many names a year from now. We really need your help. We started an endowment with a goal of $500,000. We're at $317,000. We're getting there. Help us close that gap. Help us make it happen. In your program, it tells you how. Good night, and thank you.